Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about estimating risk when you, let's say, pull a sample and you find, zero observed events. So this kind of situation might be common in, let's say, a manufacturing environment where, somebody says, hey, listen, I've pulled, 100 samples from this lot of product that's suspect. I didn't find any failures. Therefore, the true risk level must be zero. Well, the fact of the matter is, if the defect level is fairly small, a sample of 100 may not pick it up. And this calculator kind of tells you what is the worst level of risk that you can anticipate that is still consistent with finding zero events, or let's say defects. So for example, if I tested 100 items, okay, I could have a failure rate, okay, a worst case risk as high as 3% and still be consistent with zero observed events. Okay, so I could truly have zero, but it could be as high as 3% and still be consistent with finding nothing. And as I go up in sample size, of course, let's say I do 300, okay, now my risk level goes down further. So now my risk level could be as high as 1% and still be consistent with zero observed events. This interactive graph here kind of shows the situation a little bit more clearly. So as your sample size goes up here on the bottom, your worst case estimate of your risk, your upper level risk, goes down as well. So if you're pulling, let's say, 20 samples, okay, your worst case risk could be as high as 15% and still be consistent with zero observed events. But as you start to increase your sample size, and let's say we're down to 90, okay, and I still find nothing, my upper level risk starts to decrease, but it still could be as high as 3% and still be consistent with zero observed events. It could truly be zero, but it could be as high as 3%. So that's one way of looking at risk when you're not finding anything. The other question often is, well, how large of a sample do I need given a certain risk level that I'm willing to live with? So click on this tab here, and let's say I'm willing to live with a risk of no more than 1%. So here it says that I would need a sample of at least 300 items, okay, with zero observed events, to kind of ensure that my true defect rate could be between 0 and 1%. And of course, if you go smaller, say 0.5%, you can see that your sample size will go up to 600 and so forth. So as this number becomes smaller, okay, your sample size is definitely going to go up. Okay, it'll give you more assurance, but it's also at a larger cost as well. A lot of times people say, well, I want 100% assurance or a guarantee, which means that your failure risk is 0, which basically tells you that you would need an infinite amount of samples. It's really undefined. And this calculator on this tab here and this one are complementary to each other. So going back over here, we can see that if we want very good assurance for our risk level, okay, as this risk level goes down, the sample size is going to go up quite dramatically. If we're willing to live with more risk, okay, the sample size becomes smaller. Anyway, you can do a lot of what-if scenarios with this calculator. It's a lot of fun to play around with. And really the moral of the story here is that when people come to you and say they've sampled something and found no events, it doesn't mean that the probability of finding an event is 0. It just means that it's small enough that the sample size that was chosen simply didn't detect it. This is also based on a 95% confidence interval. Okay, and if you're interested in more, it's based on something called the 3/n rule. So you can calculate these by hand just with the fraction 3/n, where n is your sample size, and that'll also tell you the upper level risk you're looking at. Anyway, hope this helped. Hope you enjoy this calculator, and we'll talk to you again.